Welcome to Navigating Realities. We're here with my good friend, Don E. Camp, one of the brilliant photographers and artists that I ever met, and I think the world have ever met. Appreciate you being here, Don.
Eric, thank you very, very much. It's always an honor if we asked to do something like this. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
The pleasure is always mine, Don. You know, we've had deep discussions quite often about life, and one of the things about Navigating Reality is we're going to talk about things that we're told not to talk about: race, religion, and politics. And you and I have had many conversations about this before, and we want to highlight some of the work that you've done, particularly your work in Dust-Shaped Hearts. Let's talk a little bit about, before we get into that, your childhood. Like, where are you from? Where'd you grow up? What are some of your earliest memories growing up?
Earliest memories were in Western Pennsylvania, a little town that I always described as being about 70 miles north of Pittsburgh, 70 miles south of Erie, 70 miles east of Cleveland, in the middle of steel. Because it was a steel town, malleable town. They melted steel. They got our iron ore and they melted it. They formed it. They shipped it. It smelled of, it was a steel town. That's where I was raised.
Wow.
Steel town has a special smell, a special view and everything.
So when you think about Western Pennsylvania, and this is just something off the cuff, you don't think about many Black folks being in Western Pennsylvania. What was the culture like? What was the ethnic makeup of your town?
That was interesting. It's a large Black population, but the town that I lived in was really composed of immigrants and migrants. A lot of the Black population came to work on the steel mills in around 1935 or 36, because they had a big strike. And they went down, they got trained, they trained loads of Black folks from the South, North and South Carolina mainly, and brought them to break the strike in the steel mills. It was also a lot of immigrants from Eastern Europe and from Italy, because Europe had been so destroyed by the two wars. And a lot of the migrants, of course, were coming to the United States to get something, because Europe was in such bad shape after World War I, it was a terrible shape. World War II destroyed almost 70% of Europe. And so, therefore, a lot of migrants came in from Europe, and they came to the steel towns. So it was composed at that time of Black population. It was it was very interesting because it was composed Italians, Yugoslav, German. I remember when I walked to school in the first grade, I would always walk by two ethnic homes, the German home and the, which one was it? Slovakian home. They were next door to each other. The German home and the Polish home. They were next to each other, but they were separate. All right. And across the street was the Croatian home. Across town was the Italian home. And so all these ethnic groups had their own home.
Wow.
All right.
So that's very interesting when you describe that, because, migrants and immigration is a huge hot button issue right now. We've heard this in the past. This election just passed. There's a lot of talk about migrants, coming to, crime, eating cats and dogs, something to that effect. What was your experience growing up in what appears or seems to be a very diverse community?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting that, talk about eating cats and dogs. There were the stories that the European immigrants were eating cats and dogs. It's a common lie. It's meant to debase other people. But yeah, it was. But the thing I was talking about with a friend of mine a few days ago was, in my class, from second grade through sixth grade, I was one of two Black kids in the school. Because we moved to what was called, I guess, the middle of the hill, The hill was composed of the lower part of the hill was people who worked in the factories, and they were mostly black people and poor white people. We were fortunate to be able to move up economically to get in the middle of the hill. And I was one street in so that I could go to this other school. And so I happened to be one of two black kids in the school. And we thought about it when I was talking with someone about this. I realized that one of the things that we were constantly taught at that point was assimilation. We must assimilate. We must assimilate. We must assimilate. And I remember coming back as a kid, and people were saying, "Well, black folks can't assimilate." And I was like, "Well, so as a kid, that was very confusing because it might have been on the test. Well, what must we do as Americans?" And I would, of course, probably have written assimilate.
Wow. That's that. The word assimilation has a lot of, I guess, it brings a lot of emotions because I think when we think about that, and it's very unique. You talk about your community assimilation. Help me out, Don. Is that's just really stripping you of your culture and not? So those were you talked about all these different ethnic groups in your community. Assimilation is, I guess, what Baldwin would call Europeans becoming white. Is that?
Well, exactly. That's what happened. My childhood friends, I learned, one of my childhood friends was Italian, and I learned to cuss in Italian.
That's pretty funny.
So, so I mean, and many of them, their parents or their grandparents did not speak English.
Yeah.
All right. So yes, my friends were the children of Italians, Polish. When I went back to that town, all of those buildings, those ethnic buildings, were falling down.
Wow.
And all of my friends, or the people I knew at that time, and the children had become white.
That's very interesting. It's like when I think about these issues and what languages we can speak. I was told, asked the question, if you could speak a second language, what would it be? And I said it would be my native language, but I don't know what that is, right? And so there were a lot of folks in the room who were surprised when I said that, but I realized that not many Americans can speak their ethnic language because we assimilate, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. We'll come back to that another time. But how has that experience growing up? How did you get started in photography? I mean, you're a world-renowned photographer, and the way you do your, do we call them portraits or are they painted?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. No, they're kind of known as portraits. It is that kind of genre. For me, they're headshots because politically, socially, they are headshots. They're nothing more than that. But that can refer back to my childhood because for some reason, I guess I've always I've always been interested in photography. I was always interested in the photograph from 4, 5, 6 years old. I remember I would take the newspaper. I was always looking through the newspaper for photographs. My father had this beautiful set of encyclopedias of animals, and they were my favorite thing when I was 6 or 7 years old. Just constantly going through there, and I learned a lot of the animals around the world because of that. But I realized now, looking for Black people, particularly Black men, and the newspaper. And in the town where I lived, there just weren't. I went back last summer, and I looked through 2 years of microfilm, mostly because it was after the war. I looked through 1945 and 46, which was just toward the end of the war, and an age when I would have been looking through those. And all of the photographs I saw were all of them, except for one group of white women, a few photographs of white women soldiers, wax and waves, and one black man. And how he got in there, I have no idea. He had become the director of the George Washington Community Center, and they thought it was worthy of putting him there. All the information on black people was in a once a week or so column, and it wasn't even once a week because I didn't run into it once a week. I ran into it occasionally of a column called "News Fit for Colored People," but no photographs. And I think I was looking for photographs of me, but all I saw in the microfilm was photographs of white men, white businessmen, white soldiers, white sailors, white this, white that. It was always white men. That's all.
Wow. How did that, and it's so funny because we talked about this before, and you gave me this book, Don, because, it's amazing, The Unseen, Unpublished Black History. You remember giving me this book? Another friend of mine gave it to me as well. What struck you about this book and your experience not seeing a representation of who you are in your culture?
Well, the thing is, it was nothing new. I coined a phrase. I hope it's picked up on and looked at, and that is the idea of photographs by omission. And in this case, what I'm thinking and what I'm talking about is a case where there are thousands, if not millions, of photographs of one thing, and the missing photograph is just because it's been ignored, purposely removed from existence. Sometimes by ignorance. It's not always malicious. One point where it's not malicious, for example, is when I first started doing dust-shaped hearts. I did my brothers. I didn't do my siblings. And in the book, there's a little section called Sons of My Father. Could have been siblings of my parents. I didn't do my sister. I have photographed my sister. I did not do her for that. My bad.
Well, what was it about your brothers that you felt compelled to photograph them?
I did that because I was looking at black men. When I first started the project, I really wanted to do the existence of black men. And part of that was because, there was very little positive information about black men. And then also the news, they were talking about the extinction of black men. We were just supposed to go, and they mentioned us as a species. We were just going to vanish in the future. And so this was really kind of the beginning of Dust-Shaped Hearts. And then I thought, well, if we're going to vanish, I should really preserve, recreate some images so that 500 years from now, people will be able to know what these people who created music, who created music in America, who created fashion in America, who created America.
That we actually existed, right? That our culture, our expression, our creativity.
Exactly.
And it's so funny because when you looking back on it, you not seeing black men in these newspaper articles really allowed you to become this amazing artist.
Well,
the creativity, what you're doing, Don.
Yeah. Well, I also worked at a newspaper. When I came to Philadelphia, to work as the Evening and Sunday Bulletin, which was, if I think about it, it was kind of a historic thing. It's fascinating because there's so many things left that we can be first at.
Yeah, that's the country's 200 years old and we still being the first at something, right? That's ironic, right?
So, I was the first.
250 years old, I believe, right?
Yeah, 250, right. Because I was the first black photographer to work for Major Daley in the city of Philadelphia, fourth in the country. And, we took headshots. And I thought, well, they're not in the newspaper. Before I went there, I thought it was kind of ignorant on their part, but not malicious.
Mm-hmm.
But and then when we go out and do a job, the first thing we would do is we would get headshots. Almost no matter what we were doing, no matter what kind of a feature we were doing, we got headshots.
Mm-hmm.
And the headshots were useful because they went in the files. And if you robbed a bank or if you were promoted to the bank manager, they'll had you on file, and they just had to go in the file, and they had something to publish.
Mm-hmm.
But black men, they're just really it was a record of crime.
That's all we were depicted as.
That's all we were depicted. The only time we would be in the newspaper was if we had committed a crime.
Wow. Wow.
And I thought I could change that.
Mm-hmm.
But ignorance on my part. There was no desire to change it.
You shared with me when we had this conversation a while back. It was one of the reasons why you left the paper. And they didn't want you to leave, but you left voluntarily.
I did.
Why?
Yeah. I was told before I went to work for a newspaper by a photographer for there's this photo gathering news organization called Magnum.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in Vietnam, I met Philip Jones Griffith, who did this book called Vietnam Incorporated. He was an incredible photographer, a war photographer. And he spent 3 days with me, kind of giving me ins and outs and telling me a great deal about the business.
Mm-hmm.
You need to go to work for a newspaper. He told me I needed to go to work for a newspaper. Don't say longer than 4 years. And then go out and do, what you need to do as a photographer. I didn't understand that at the time, and I stayed 9 years.
Mm.
And I think I understood now why he told me that. But after 9 years, I felt like if I spent another day in that space, I would die.
Mm.
I would physically die.
Really?
There was no desire because I felt like I was destroying myself every time I went out on a job. It was always this kind of glorification of people who weren't me.
Mm.
Everybody was important but me.
Mm.
And I just could not tolerate it anymore. And my older daughter was, I think, probably maybe 14 or 15 at the time, says, well, you should quit. That's what you would tell us to do.
Well, she put you on the spot.
Yeah, she put me on the spot.
Wow.
And it was like, this is going to be such a relief to be an example.
Mm.
All right. And so I resigned.
Wow. Did you have something lined up already?
Nope.
Really?
No.
That's a dangerous proposition there.
But the option was dying.
No. Yeah. Yeah.
Really, the option was dying.
Inside your creativeness, who you are, is it?
No, death.
Really?
I physically felt like I was dying.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started, I came out freelancing, not knowing business. I had no business sense at all. I still don't. But somehow we made it.
Wow. That's incredible.
And then at 42, I decided that I had to get a degree because I had no college degree. Mm-hmm. And so I became a college freshman at 42 years old.
42?
Yes.
Wow. That's pretty cool. Because some people feel like they can't go back to school or don't think they are smart enough to go back to school. I went back to school late myself.
Did you?
Oh, yeah. I went back to school late myself. Yeah.
When?
I went back, actually, probably, it's funny you mentioned that. It was in my 40s.
Really?
Yes. I had originally dropped out, started working, got married early, had kids. And, my wife at the time, we wanted to get her through college. But I went back in my 40s just thinking about that, talking to
Okay.
you now. Wow.
Yeah, and I was preceded by my brother, the one just before me,
Mhm.
um, who at 40 started med school.
Wow.
All right.
Wow.
I mean, he had a couple of degrees. He did not go directly into college. He spent a period of time. He was a musician,
Hmm.
but he spent a period over time gathering credits. And at 42, Ford offered him a scholarship to go to med school, so he went to med school.
Wow.
And I thought if he can go at 40, I can definitely go at 42.
And you 42, you come through, you're starting your photography work. You
Well, no, actually, I was getting out of photography. I was going to something more solid, like anthropology.
one of my favorite subjects, right? The theory of learning. One of my favorite, one of my lifelong dreams is get to Egypt. I mean, then you learn about anthropology and how
Oh yeah,
the grave robbers, like
yeah, exactly.
how it's still history from Africa and from Egypt.
Yeah,
But yeah, that's interesting. Tell me
but
about. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, but anyway, that was it. So I went, took a year of anthropology, and found out that I'm not anthropology material, and so I decided, well, I'm an artist. That's what I am. So I
Yeah.
went to art school.
Every time I talk to you, we sit in one on one. You bring out in me and remind me that we all are artists in some way.
Oh yeah,
Talk to me a lot about that, because it's this creative spirit that's inside of.
yeah. People deny being artists, but to me, being an artist is there. There are two things that we do as human beings. We art and we science.
Hmm.
We know and we do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we use science to do art, and we do art to do science. That's what we are as human beings. That's what we do. That's the creative process.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have different levels of it. Some people can, cook an egg. Another folks can do, bourguignon. Okay.
Wow.
You know,
I always come away talking with you, really realizing and sparking the creativity in me. And when we talk about art, you spend time in two places a lot, America and France. Who like does do the French appreciate art differently
oh
than
yeah,
America? Tell me about
yeah,
that.
yeah. It's interesting because art literature is very, very much in the lives of the French, and I was probably Europeans. Um, and I don't know why it's not so much in the heart in the lives of Americans, other than possibly um, we want to deny. There's a denial of the cultures that they came from,
Mm-hmm.
um, and also a denial of wanting to learn someone else's culture in America. See, this is the thing about America is there's so many there's so many entry points.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can enter it from a black point of view. You used to be able to enter it from Polish, Italian, and all these other
Mm-hmm.
sources, English, and we had to study each other.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a denial. I'm not going to study that, and I had that. I wasn't going to study Shakespeare. Like, why is this black kid going to study Shakespeare? And one day I realized it's interesting once we see it. Once we see in a sense someone else of our culture doing it. I remember I cannot think of the actor's name, but he did Macbeth at the Annenberg Theater in Philadelphia.
Mm.
And all of a sudden it hit me that, yeah, we could be Macbeth.
Yeah.
I mean, why not? It's theater. It's a story.
Mm-hmm.
It's a human story. But I think a great deal of America, we don't see the commonality of our human story.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in Europe, it's kind of short. You have little villages,
Mm-hmm.
and they learn their story.
Mm.
And so, when I was living in France in the military, I rented a house with a friend in this little village. And one of my good friends, the guy who introduced me to my wife,
Mm-hmm.
um, he raised pigs. And I would go over in the evening or during his break in the afternoon for coffee, or he'd come to my house and we'd have coffee and whatever. And we discussed, painters. We discussed, Van
Mm.
Gogh, and we discussed Nietzsche and meanings of this and meanings of that. And because it was a part of his life, that's what they're learning simply about their culture.
That's so fascinating, Don, because when I'm thinking about like, because you go to both places and you see and you hearing and you understand that Europeans actually know their history,
Yeah.
right? But Americans don't. We deny our history.
Yep.
We don't. Not only don't we don't know it, we deny it.
We deny
we
it.
squash it.
Yeah.
Is it? Why do you think that is? Why?
Uh, I, I think it's because there's so many cultures coming together. And assimilation, let's go back to assimilation.
Mm-hmm.
What does assimilation mean? Does it mean you learn of other cultures, or do you deny other cultures, or do you create something new?
That's exactly what it is. You deny other cultures and you create something new.
Yeah.
And that newness is, I don't know exactly.
But does the newness mean that you forget the past?
That's interesting. Right. Yeah.
To me, it doesn't.
Mm.
To me, it means you grasp the past.
Mm-hmm.
You understand the past. You eliminate the stuff that's killing us.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff that's making us better, that we hold on to.
Mm.
But America, we have an ugly past.
Yeah, we don't like to we don't like to talk about that. We hide it because I think perhaps maybe the truth of it is too painful for European Americans or white Americans. I don't know. I don't know if they know, according to Baldwin, white people don't know nothing about themselves. And that's why it's easy for them to treat black people or marginalized people bad because they don't have a history of themselves.
Well, but the history in America is just terrible. It's mean. And I honestly have to look at Buffalo soldiers too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Buffalo soldiers were very efficient.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's sad because they came here as migrants. They were French, they were Dutch, they were German. They had a culture. They had a history, and to have that stripped away from them, was stripped away from black folks who came here. I mean, we're a country that really doesn't know much about each other or our histories. Like, history is not the past. We are constantly making history.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Wow. So politically, I mean, you grew up in Western Pennsylvania. Was politics discussed in your home? Was it something that was?
Yeah, yeah. It depends on what we mean by politics.
Mm.
I mean, to me, politics is just simply how we get along, how we navigate life, the social rules,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the general rules, but it's the social rules too.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's one example, for example, is that again in that school.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking at it the other day, and I remember I saw in the photograph of my second grade classroom. This photograph in the front row is a little girl, and I remember her name. She was Nancy Berger, and she was a little Jewish girl, and she suffered being a little Jewish girl who was not very pretty, who didn't have really nice clothes like some of the other girls, and she was really picked on.
Mm.
And I'm proud of little Donnie. I didn't pick on her.
Mm.
I kind of like stood off. I watched, but I hurt for her.
Mm.
All right, I'm really proud of me for that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other kids, and I remember his name too, which I'm not going to say, he called me the N-word.
Mm-hmm.
And I beat him up.
Mm.
And I came home proud that I beat him up. And my brother, my older brother, don't do that again. You can't waste your time doing that. 20 years from now, he'll be standing in the corner calling people the N-word.
Mm-hmm.
You have stuff to do.
Mm.
Now, to me, that's politics.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that? How do you move forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I don't think many of us think about it in that way. Matter of fact, until you said that, when we think about politics, it's all like, Democrat, Republican, Independent. But how you describe it is like really maybe a different approach that we should perhaps examine more.
Well, possibly. Well, we couldn't. For us, it really wasn't much sense of us thinking about it in terms of Democratic and Republic, because it didn't really make any difference. Because you weren't going to get in office anyway, so you didn't run for office. I mean,
That's true.
all of the council and everything was all white, so
Yeah. I mean, that's the reality of it, right, Don?
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about this past election, because the numbers showed that a lot of people stayed home, and there's this sentiment, and they typically blame the Black community or Latino community, but if your life is not going to be changed anyway, what's the point? I'm not saying I'm not saying I espouse to that, but there are some people that say, well, my life was the same as under Republican. My life was the same under Democrat. So I don't have no dog in that fight.
Well, but I think we're talking about two different things in a way. All right. Well, what I'm saying was that the mayor, the police chief, and all of that in my town, and the town next to it, and the town next to it, and the town next to it had no Black folks.
Yeah.
So why? I would probably vote. My parents probably voted, but they voted for the best white person or the most empathetic white person.
But has that changed much? I mean, you think about America, right? I mean, there are still towns when you go to.
Oh yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know if we're saying anything different. I think your experience is that experience, but for a person who's live in an urban neighborhood, it doesn't matter to them. It doesn't matter if the person who's a politician, Black or white, if their life is the same. And they're like, well, what difference? I have no dog in that fight.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
I mean, think about it. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have an explanation or a solution to that right now, because we're still trying to recover from, whether you're happy with the results or not. But for some people, their position is, my life is going to be no different than whoever gets elected. Yeah. So what's the point?
Exactly. Understood.
So
understood.
From a political perspective, as you describe it, how we deal with each other socially, I think that's a more healthier way to approach it. So now we can have a discussion about, like, interacting with each other.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's where the discussion has to happen. But from every level of our relationship between each other, to me, it's political.
Why is it so difficult for us here in the West to get to that place?
The desire, I think there's a real desire to maintain power by a part of America, or to increase that power by a part of America. I do really think it's a power game, and that there is a fear that if I get something, if I as a Black person get anything, it has taken away from someone else's plate, which to me is just stupid.
True.
All right.
But it's a very popular way of folks think, and that's how people think here
Yeah.
in the West.
Yeah.
Because because you've traveled abroad so much, Don, you see different views and perspective. And one of the things you said to me when we were talking about this election is America ready for a female president? And you said we were talking about this. You said Europeans think differently about that because they come from a monarchy.
Yeah.
Explain it. Talk me a little about that.
Yeah. The whole, we are not that far removed globally from that kind of system where you were ruled by a family in the lineage of the family or by a conqueror. So America is really rare in that. It's not in a sense, it is the conqueror. Every time I spent a lot of time thinking about that, but then I thought about the whole idea, and I realized I left my grandparents out on my father's side, so I can't do that. I don't know. I just feel that there's a difference. I don't know enough about the history. I know a little bit about Europe. And it's a theory, and I've talked about my wife with it, and she doesn't really quite agree with me. And she's French, and so she was raised with that. So I'm not sure if I'm right on that or not.
Well, since you mentioned your wife, I mean, I think your experience around these issues. And I'm curious to see how it impacts your work. You come from a global perspective. Your wife is French. You have multi-ethnic children. You in a multi-ethnic marriage. How has that influenced your work? I mean, you talk about, and I see all the Black portraits, but you also have other folks that you've portrayed. So how has that experience in terms of your professional career influenced your work?
Well, that I play with that idea, and I think the question before was serious, and I like the idea of being able to play with things, and so the headshots came from the newspaper, and the idea of any time a Black man appeared in the newspaper and being a criminal. And so I decided that I was going to not just preserve it, but I chose Black men for a particular reason, because I wanted to create these headshots of Black men that nobody could identify. And sometimes you could Google them. Even early on, you could Google a few of them, and they were like, "Oh, he did such and such." But most of us were just Black men that I knew did something. Man, you can't imagine how unpopular that was. When I would talk about it, Black women would get angry with me. Why aren't you doing Black women too? And I would fight back with them. It was like, but it was a game for me at that point. Because Black women were doing Black women. They weren't doing Black men. And a few of them were doing some really vicious things against Black men, which really kind of upset me. And so I said, okay, I'm going to fight back on this. And it's just like, I'm doing Black men because that's what I am. I'm a Black man, not a Black woman, but a Black man. Well, why don't you doing white people? Because I'm a Black man. One of the newspaper critics was really mean, and he wrote about it in relation to two other Guggenheim fellows, and he wrote beautiful things about the other two. Me, he said, also included was Camp and his brothers who do things.
That was it.
That was my review. Okay. And this is 3 Guggenheim fellows. About 10 years later, it's very interesting. He wrote about me in another show. And he says, and now he's doing pictures, he's doing headshots or portraits of white men and white people. Okay. And he wrote other beautiful stuff. But I wasn't important until I was doing white people.
That's interesting. So
But for me, I live in a world that runs from very, 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 very dark to very, 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 very light. I live in a world. And I have recognized that since I was a baby.
That's fascinating to see that you weren't getting the recognition until you were portraying white folks, and your work speaks for itself. It's a phenomenal work. I remember we were talking one time about your work around the Emmett Till. Talk to me a little about that.
Emmett Till was 1 year younger than me when he was killed. I was 15, he was 14. I worked at my father's barber shop, and at that time I was learning to cut hair, and sweeping up the hair from all the other chairs, and going in on the weekends and mopping the shop, and I was shining shoes, and my father was teaching me how to manage the cash and sell the newspapers. And he was teaching me the business, and I really practically ran the shop, and he just made sure I ran it correctly. So the Jet magazine came out, and in there was the photograph of Emmett Till. And in the barber shop that weekend, and probably a few more weekends, but that particular weekend, I heard the stories from veterans and other folks who were just fed up. The arguments were the boy should have known better. And this came from people who had moved away from that area. Another said, enough is enough. I used to ask particularly Black men when I would photograph them for anything, what did you do when you heard about Emmett Till? If they were old enough to know. And they all told me some variation of what they did. I had the honor of photographing Muhammad Ali.
Wow.
And that was my question to him. What did you do? He said, we got a group of kids together. We just went out and broke car windows. He was a fighter. I went to sleep. Fight or flight. I went from a straight A student to F, failing.
Wow.
I just gave up.
That has such a profound impact.
Yeah. And for decades, I would always, I think he was almost forgotten. So, the revival, the new information coming out about Emmett Till, to me is really important because it had gotten to a point where I would ask people, what did you do with Emmett Till? And they would say, who?
So you felt compelled to do.
I felt compelled to do whatever I could.
And your work got some pretty remarkable acclaims, right?
Yeah, it's now in the collection of the Delaware Art Museum, the piece that I did on that. And it's really a very interesting concept because it's on a mirror. It's the image of Emmett Till and a kind of really crinkly, destroyed flag, and it's called Emmett Till America. And between Emmett Till and the flag is actually a line of the people two of the men who killed him.
Wow.
But when you look in the mirror, it comes from a phrase, a Baha'i prayer. It says, thus their superstitions have become barriers between themselves and their own hearts. And so it's this image between self and the reflected self. Yeah.
It's an amazing piece. It was extraordinary. You mentioned the Baha'i faith. Your background, your faith, is that something that helped shape you as well?
Yeah. As a Baha'i, being a Baha'i is one of those things that There are things that I guess, like I felt the newspaper was going to be the end of my life.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are also things that save your life.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in fact, I know there are.
Mm-hmm.
Some it's a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and some it's little things. Finding Marie was a little thing, but very important.
Mm-hmm.
Very important. For me, finding the Baha'i faith was very important.
Mm-hmm.
The good things and the bad things that have happened in it have changed and made major changes in my life.
Yeah. I was fascinated when I found out you were Baha'i because I don't typically think of the Baha'i faith being a faith of black folks.
Oh,
We're Muslims, we're Christians and a mixture of other things. But, one of the fascinating things about the Baha'i faith is it's always this sense of hope. And I actually just like, why do you guys come from this perspective? Like you think the perspective of things are going to work out, regardless how bad things seem, where, quite frankly, it's very different from, Christianity, which, really Christianity is steeped in guilt and fear.
Yeah.
And so let me be clear. There's a difference between the teachings of Jesus and Christianity. So I want folks, before folks start throwing darts at me, there's a big difference between the teachings of Jesus and what he lived, and because he wasn't a Christian, Jesus practiced Judaism, and Christianity, particularly Western Christianity, which is really driven by fear and guilt. What was fascinating about learning about Baha'i, and I learned about it years ago, and then I met you as a black. I met a black person who was a Baha'i. Like, like where the hell did that come from?
We're here. We're here.
I asked you about this, Don. Like, how do you guys just? It's like there's a sense of hope in the face of such degradation.
Okay, let's look at the last election. A few decades ago, the USSR is like folded.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I said, okay, well, there's one superpower. Mm-hmm. Wonder how America's going to do it. Mm-hmm. And what keeps me going, and I think it's a part of the doctrine of being Baha'i, is that there's an old world order and there's a new world order being built. Mm-hmm. The fall of Russia, of the USSR, the fall of the United States is inevitable.
Yeah,
because we are in part of the process of building a world, a new world order. Not even a new world order, a world order of strengthening that world order. Mm-hmm. And so, what happened? For me, all the time I'm wondering during the election, are we going to be given a little reprieve? Mm-hmm. Or are you just going to go go full force? Mm-hmm. Looks like we went full force.
Yeah. I guess depending on who you ask, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the people who were in marching saying Jews will not replace us. Mm-hmm. All the other stuff, all of that is now a part of our lives.
It is. That's true. But yet the Baha'i faith teaches, this sense of, I'm reading some of the text that you've given me and the material, but there's this sense of it's still going to work out.
Yeah. And my response to it the following day was, well, I had to teach more about what the Baha'i faith is and what the world order is. Mm-hmm. About how, the world is one. There's one world. Is that one? I think the phrase that I first learned is the earth is but one country and mankind its citizens.
Yeah.
And people who hate the Baha'i faith have to admit that's good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's so refreshing. I think, just learning about different faith traditions, because, I explore many different faith traditions, and, I'm on the Coalition of Religious Leaders here in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. And I love all the traditional faiths. And that's maybe what keep us going, moving forward. And I have some different opinions about this whole issue about morals. I don't think we're moral people, but that's a whole nother discussion for another time. But Donna, it's been absolutely amazing to have you on. We'll have you back when we're talking more about your work. But, one of the things that I'm going to be asking every guest, like, what is one of your favorite quotes and why?
My favorite quote is, "O Son of Spirit, my first order is this. The most beloved thing in my sight is justice." Okay. And why? Because it's the most difficult, to me, it's the most difficult thing to achieve. It's the most difficult thing that has to be constantly on our minds. Is how can I be just? But it's the most beloved thing in the sight of God. But it's the way we look at it. It's how do we, what do I expect of you? But even to me, it's what do I expect of myself?
Yeah.
What is just to me? And how do I be that?
Yeah.
And to me, it's a godly thing. It's a religious thing.
Yeah, that's so true. In the Hebrew text, there's a text that says, what do you require me, O Lord? And it's do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly before your God. And we quote those things, and we say those things, but a lot of it doesn't come forth in terms of how we treat each other. Now, let me back up. I think for the most part, most Americans do believe in justice, do believe and want peace and unity. But I guess the politics of how you describe it, how we deal with each other socially, is how it's going to play out. And I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Not quite sure how that's going to play out, given all the isms.
Well, there's this thing about abundance, and there's this fear that if I have, if there's justice and we're equal, then I'm going to take something off the table that belongs to you. In reality, I want to put something on the table and share it with you. And in true civilization, that's what works. We all have more, not less.
But it always seems to be a threat to those who are the elites, who think that they had to give up something in order to make sure other folks are thriving instead of just surviving.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think in that point, they're counting wrong.
Yeah.
They're counting the wrong thing. I mean,
Yeah. Well, Don, this has been amazing. As always, I'm always learning something from you, my friend. Appreciate you. Appreciate you. And thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much for the invitation. And again, the wonderful conversation.
As always. Thank you. That's a wrap. If you can't respect that, your whole perspective is whack. Now, with your level and I fade to black. Thank you for listening. I'm Reverend Eric Dobson, and this was Navigating Realities, where dialogues meets understanding. Follow and subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, and tune in on all streaming platforms. See you next time.